Sound is one form that can move us. If we hear to our favorite song, it makes us move our body. If we wake up in the morning, we hear our alarm sound and it immediately triggers that we have to catch on with the day. So it's time to get up. Sound has different meanings for different people, and even at different times, it can have a different definition. As an instance, when you are at the beach or you are at the ocean, the waves make a different sound and it has a clear memory associated with it. Even while I'm talking about it, you can visualize that moment, right? Similarly, there are different sounds that are close to us. For me personally, growing up playing a lot of cricket, the sound of a cricket ball hitting the middle of a bat is the best sound I can hear. I can literally hear the sound the entire day because that sweet willow sound is so much associated with happiness and excitement for me that I'm sharing this with you. And I'm sure one personal sound that you and me will both agree that we have deeply connected with each other or with the environment here is the sound of this glass bottle when you open it up and those bubbles that you hear come to the brink of the bottleneck. I'm talking about none other than Coca-Cola. I'm hoping this podcast brings a lot of great information for not just the marketers, but also people who are trying to conceptualize a new business, a new brand. Let's dive right into it. Let me take you back to Atlanta, 1886. Now, you may not have any clear visual of 1886, but you can generally comprehend it's not the times that we live today, right? So, in 1886, a gentleman, a pharmacist called John Pemberton, decides to make a mix. He says, I will use these critical mixes, primarily things like sugar syrup, carbonated water, essentially cola nut, and coca leaves extract. And with this mix, I will come out with a patented medicine that will cater to people who have fatigue and headaches. Primarily, John's inspiration with this mix of ingredients was to come out with some sort of a solution for his own issues that he started developing in the civil war that he had faced at the time, where he got addicted to morphine. So he thought that this mix will really be a solution not just for himself, but he will also treat people. He started selling this medicinal mix through Jacob's Pharmacy around the same time in 1886. Only 9 drinks a day were sold in the first year. And I keep saying mix because you will see when Coca-Cola comes into the picture. So hang on. Now, in the meantime, there's a bookkeeper that John had. His name, Frank Robinson, who actually coined the name Coca-Cola. He said that, okay, if the ingredients have cola leaves extract, and it has cola nut, then why not I combine these two words and say Coca-Cola because they rhyme well too. And this is, by the way, without any marketing or branding knowledge that Frank came out with this idea. He's also the person behind this Spencerian font that we see in Coca-Cola till date. So he actually designed it as well. So he came out with this great font, Spencerian style, which was very popular in the commercial world at the time. So I would say that Frank was inspired from that. He presented it, and yes, the name Coca-Cola came from this discussion between Frank and Pemberton. Pemberton, before his death, he was speaking to a lot of investors, and one of the key investors at the time was Asa Candler, who turned out to be a smart businessman, of course, because he quickly got the mix together and made it into a commercial product. He actually changed the medicinal nuance of Coca-Cola and made it a refreshment drink, which is what we know Coca-Cola as of today. In 1892, Asa also incorporated the Coca-Cola Company, and he soon started using coupons and samples and gifting items alongside Coca-Cola to push its sales, which essentially could be the starting point of brand emotion, because till that point of time, not much of this selling used to happen. Next comes the phase where in 1915, Coca-Cola started facing so much immense competition that hundreds of copycats came into the picture. There were brand names like Coke, which is actually K-O-K-E, Taka-Cola, and Coca-Nola. All these 3 brands that I'm mentioning you, and there are quite more as well, but these essentially sound so much like Coke that it was very difficult for consumers to really differentiate which one is the actual Coca-Cola that they have heard and they drink. And the copycats were so similar because the copyright laws were not that strict at that time, as you can imagine. So Coca-Cola decided to go a different route. They said that, okay, we need to protect ourselves, so why not patent our bottle, which will become our differentiator in the marketplace. And you can say the bottle as we see today is a unique aspect of Coca-Cola and is actually the brief that was given at the time to national glass bottling companies that come out with a bottle so unique that even in the dark you can recognize it, and even when you smash it into the ground you're able to recognize that it is a Coca-Cola bottle. And this is where the Root Glass Company won this opportunity and they came out with this unique shape of contour bottle that we see today. But quite ironically, the makers of this bottle actually didn't know that there's no cacao in the bottle. So they took inspiration from a cacao pod and made the contour bottle. Now taking you a bit further to World War II time, which is 1939 and 45, Coca-Cola decided that it will distribute Coca-Cola to all US soldiers for only 5 cents. And they opened a manufacturing plant in Europe, Asia, and North Africa so that they can reach out to US soldiers. Now, this initiative touched the Americans so deeply that they started loving and associating with Coca-Cola like nothing else. The next phase that I want to take you to is the 1950s and 60s. But before I talk about this golden era of advertisement, which is what these decades were for Coke, I want to take you back a little bit before World War II to 1931, where the popular Santa Claus that the visual you and I have in the mind came into picture. A gentleman named Haddon Sundblom orchestrated this Santa Claus, which is the grandfatherly Santa Claus as we know. So when you go to malls today and you see this hearty, happy Santa Claus with white beard, this grandfatherly figure is actually credited to Sundblom because he's the one behind it. And it's not only this Santa Claus that he orchestrated, he's also behind the Sprite Boy, which came in 1941. And Sprite Boy would come in the commercials alongside Santa Claus and individually as well, promoting the spirit of Coke. Because Sprite as a word itself stands for spirit, angels, elf, and this magical connection of it that Coke wanted to project at that time. Now, I also wanted to emphasize here the word Coke. You will see so far I have stayed away from using the word Coke too much because until 1941, 1945, Coke was not an official word that belonged to Coca-Cola. It's actually very generic name that people started using for Coca-Cola in the early 1900s, and Coca-Cola stayed away from using Coke because they thought that it might confuse people, so rather stay away from it. But it became so adjective-like that Coke decided to put official papers for it for trademark in 1941, and in 1945 they got the official trademark for the word Coke. But coming back to 1950s and 60s and not deviating too much, I want to talk about one of the popular campaigns at this time, an ad name called The Pause That Refreshes. Now I'll pause here as well because it immediately reminds me of Kit Kat's tagline, have a break, have a Kit Kat. So I don't know if it's Kit Kat taking an inspiration from it, but I feel like a lot of inspiration comes from discussions like this that we are having, and why not? But something specifically that I want to highlight as a campaign here came out in 1971, which is called the Hilltop ad. Now, the peculiarity of this advertisement was that there was a group of young people who were shown on the top of a hill in Italy and were singing together about unity and peace. And this was all happening during the Vietnam War. Now, issues that relate to a lot of people, brands like Coke take the responsibility of talking about it. And this is one of the reasons that make normal generic brands iconic and legendary. Taking you further towards 1985, another interesting angle came in Coke's existence. Why? Because there was a test that was done with Pepsi, and the results came out that Pepsi's sweeter taste was preferred more by consumers. So people at Coke got a little anxious and they decided to make the Coke sweet as well. But guess what happened? There was a huge backlash and outrage. People were on the streets with the old bottles of Coke saying, "Bring the Coke back." So in only 79 days' time, Coca-Cola had to bring its original Coke ingredients back, and they came out with Coca-Cola Classic. Taking you further to 1990s and 2000s, Coke by this time had become a really big brand. It had already made acquisitions of brands like Minute Maid, Powerade, and Thumbs Up in India. I'm sure people who are from India would know what Thumbs Up is. Thumbs Up is this iconic cult brand that even people drink today for the carbonated hit that it has. But the acquisitions were done with the idea of connecting with local consumers. So just bringing this huge US legacy of commercial success of advertisements was not just good enough, is what Coke thought. And quite rightly so, because great brands become legendary once again when they localize themselves with local consumers and their tastes and preferences. So by doing acquisitions is just an easier way to penetrate in the market. Now during this time, Coke was now serving 1.9 billion drinks a day. Taking you further to 2010s, consumers had evolved. Consumers were now talking about health, sustainability, and sugar component in Coke. So, to connect with consumers, Coke came out with a campaign around this time, Share a Coke. I'm sure you would have heard about this campaign, which it took popular names from across the world and snapped them on the cans and bottles. And Coke listened to its consumers as well, because they did come with ecological packaging, teas and coffees, and healthier options. So you see how Coca-Cola, where it started from in Atlanta to where it is today in 2025. So there are so many takeaways from this discussion that we're having. I'm sure you would have noticed quite a few, but essentially I want to talk about three huge takeaways from this discussion. Number one is globalization. Globalization is actually a combination of words global and local. Globalization means that you enter a market with a localized approach, yet keeping the global nature in place. And Coke is a wonderful example. So the acquisition of Thumbs Up is one such example, or coming out with Coke Studio. Now, Coke Studio is not a product, is not a beverage, but great brands do this so that they can localize themselves. Second is resilience and consistency. You will see that throughout, the brand Coke has stayed resilient. There have been ups, there have been downs, but Coke has stayed right there in the middle of the pitch, hitting from the middle of the bat, the willow sound that I was telling you in the beginning, just like a professional. And this is what makes it consistent as well. Yes, it made incorrect decisions when they made the call to bring new Coke, making it sweeter, but they learned the lesson very quickly. The third one is vulnerability. Vulnerability means trying out new things, being open to connecting with consumers in shapes and forms based on insights, based on experiments, just to see whether they speak the language of their audience. Coke has been vulnerable throughout its existence, and it continues to be. Think about the bad press that Coke gets on a daily basis about the high sugar content. But it keeps itself resilient and consistent. But it is vulnerable. And it is intentional as well when they come out with acquisitions like Minute Maid or coming out with initiatives like Coke Studio. These are initiatives that make the brand vulnerable because they can go against you. But great brands are resilient. They know how to fall and stand up, because this is how great brands become legendary. I hope you enjoyed today's content, because I definitely did. So when you are thinking about your next initiative or starting out a new business, think about these lessons that we have from the story of Coke. Because Coke is not just a Coke. When you open up even a can, it is a history of 139 years that we are still sipping. And to do that, it takes a lot of courage. So stand for courage, stand for yourself, try out new experiments, and do something refreshing that people smile when they use your product and brand. My name is Rachit Kapoor, and you're listening to The Marketing Guy. Until we meet next time, do take good care of yourself.